Hey YouTube, Scarecrow here. I am here today to do a deck profile on the Granblue deck. I used to get first place in the ARG Circuit Orlando Premium Tournament this past weekend. That's right, Granblue took first place, beating No Life King. So I will get into, at the end of the video, if you want to stick around to the end, I'm going to talk about how you should play this deck in order to beat No Life King. I play tested this deck against No Life King for like almost like 2 weeks to like get it really down and master like how to play against it. So that's why I was able to do so well against it. Like I never like had to go to game 3 against the deck. I just 2-0'd it every time I played it. So that said, we'll get into it. I should cover. I played against. I can only remember a few rounds. I know in the last round of Swiss, I played against Bermuda, and then in top 8, and we went to cut the top 8. I was in first. Played No Life King again, beat it, and then we got the top 4, and we just split. But I'm still in first seat, so I'm technically first place. We did cut top 4 though. But so that said, let's get going. So this deck isn't even extraordinarily like techie. Like you might be expecting maybe he was playing. There's something I'm not seeing, like a card I didn't know about that was the secret to this deck. That's not actually the case. This deck is not going to be too surprising in the way it's built. It's pretty par for the course as far as you would expect a premium Granblue deck to look. So it's mostly in the way you play it, but I'll get it. Let's get to it. Starting Vanguard, Grenache, your counter charge engine, very important card. Because of this card, you can just do whatever you want the whole game. If you don't already know it, when you ride on top of this guy, don't use his Forerunner skill. Keep him in the soul for when you get to your first Triangle Gauche. Triggers. I played 5 10k trigger crits and 4 Rough Seas Banshees for 9 crits. Rough Seas Banshee. It's like a tongue twister. Rough Seas Banshee is just way too good of a card not to play. Like her skill is like phenomenally good. One of the reasons why this deck like did good and is a good deck. Next, 1 stand trigger, Mick the Ghosty. This card isn't always like fantastic, but it has its moments where it just works out great. And sometimes the fact that you just happen to have like a stand trigger in your deck and drive check it, the stand trigger is just for game because it's a stand trigger. Like there was one game where I'd done some rearguard attacks, and my Vanguard was currently attacking, and I had one column that was rested, and the other column was a Columbard with a standing booster behind him. And when the Vanguard drove check Mick here, I used the stand trigger to stand the booster in the column that was rested. Then I attacked with the standing Columbard, used his skill to call a Columbard to in front of that booster I just stood. Then I was able to attack with that Columbard and call another attack. Mostly rerunning him for his skill to give someone plus 10 when he's hollowed. It can be helpful against, it's there for things like Gize when you need to hit over that mark and kill the opponent over that 3k base. And you can do things like call Mick, use his skill, buff someone, then use your Dancing Cutlass, revive it from the drop zone on top of Mick here, shuffle Mick into the deck. It's pretty good. Then I played 2 PG draws. Draws aren't like the best of triggers for this deck, but to make this deck the balance the way you need it to be, I played 2 because I'll get into that when it comes to the G guard. If you don't already know, You can perfect guard with this guy from the drop zone, because he doesn't have to be placed from hand, just placed period. And he's a 10k trigger. So, and last is our 4 heals. You don't need to run the heal trigger. That skill goes off when you G guard, because you don't need the counter blast or counter charge, and you don't need the soul charge. You should just play this for the 10k power. Into the grade 1s. For Danny Guy Mario, your ideal turn 1 ride, obviously. After that point, he's just a 12k booster. Usually being a 12k booster doesn't matter, because most opponents were playing 12k and 13k Vanguards, but there's also a lot of 11k Vanguards in Premium, in which case being a 12k matters, because if you team him up with a 9k like Skeleton Cannoneer or Columbard, 12 plus 9 is 21, so you hit magic numbers. So, and when you ride on top of him and put a card in soul to mill 3, you get a card. It's so amazingly resourceful. You're fueling your drop zone, fueling your soul, and just picking what you want to put in your hand. Really good card. Then I played 4 Cutlass. This card is really good. I would not play less than 4 in my opinion. Obviously it's good because you're getting a booster for like free and counter charging, but like with the way this deck plays out, is very often you're doing stuff where you're like using your Vanguard to reviving things like Banshee here, moving her to Soul to draw, and then you can just refill that spot where she was by calling Banshee there, or as I said earlier, reviving Mick the Ghosty, then calling Cutlass on top of it and shuffling it back in the deck. And like you can go through your Cutlass like so many times too, because your grade 4s in this deck just make like a whole field all at once. So you'll have like, because your Cutlasses don't really die from their own skill, they're staying on the board. So like when you go into your Vanguard and then you're like, use skill, revive 5 guys, you can just call things over top of Cutlass, put them back in the drop zone, and that just makes it that much easier to get 2 Cutlass in the drop zone again, and then be able to use Cutlass again for a counter charge. Then I played 3 Stride Father, Tommy the Ghosty. This deck plays 10 grade 3s, so you don't really need to play more than 3 Stride Father. You could maybe go 2, but I'm more comfortable with 3. Yeah, and like even like if you have to use grade 2s and 1s to add the 3 to Stride, like in this deck it doesn't really matter because you're just going to revive them anyways. And then the last grade 1 spot is 2 Freddy the Ghosty. This guy can be used as a PG when called from the drop zone, so you can still use his skill. And the reason I'm playing him, other than like that fact, and not playing just like 4 PG draws, by running him, I had some extra room in the grade 1 lineup, and by doing this, it lets me dedicate like more like impactful triggers than draws into my trigger lineup. So I had the room, and it just let me play a better trigger lineup. That's why we're playing him, and he can PG from the drop zone just like the draw. For the grade 2s, 4 Ruin Shade. Later in the game, it's not as helpful, but early game, it just fuels your drop zone and beats for 13. Later on in the game, it can be helpful because it's a 17 by itself, but mostly it's to get your deck running faster early game. And that's why I'm playing 4 of them, just to see them fast, more likely. Then we played 3 Columbard. This card is stupidly good because it can call a copy of itself, which is dumb. You can Columbard into a Columbard. So good. Yeah. I only played 3 just to make room for grade 3s, honestly. And then I played 3 Skeleton Cannoneer. Another like super good card. Just pop a card, draw a card. This card's also super important to the No Life King matchup, which I'll be getting into later. Then we have 4 grade 3s, 4 Basskirk. You almost never get to use his skill to revive things. Mostly we just play him because he gives a protect if it's at 12k. Sometimes, very rarely, his skill does help, but and when it does help, you're like, thank God I have this. So that's why we're playing him. Then we have 4 Skeleton Dragon. It's not bad to ride this thing because it's still essentially doing the same thing on the Vanguard as Baskirk, but mostly you'd rather just drop this to the drop zone and revive it and kill things, or kill your opponent. I played 1 Violence Flanger. I didn't really get to use this thing a whole lot. There were times where I almost had the perfect scenario to use it, but didn't quite add up to it. It's in here, to be honest, mostly to kill Gizeh. The idea is that you go into this guy, buff him up with his own skill, buff him up with things like make the ghosty, give him as big a boost as possible, try to make him unblockable, try to give your Vanguard swing, give the triggers the flanger, try and attack for game. Sometimes your opponent will be at 5 damage, you have Franger, you have the 0s and 1s in hand, just go like that. There was one game where I almost was able to Megiddo revive Franger, buff him, and then I was going to be able to revive Franger and 3-4 Skeleton Dragons, which that is game. But I was not quite close enough because I didn't have the cards in hand to ride to grade 3 to get the grade 3 and the soul and pay the cost of stride, so I didn't actually get to do it, but in theory, it's a good card. If nothing else, I was using it as stride fodder. And then last is Nightstorm. At 1, I feel like that was just good enough in the deck. I didn't really need to play more of them. I saw them enough. So that is it for the main deck. For the G-Zone. 1 Seabreeze because it's Seabreeze. If for some reason you're dumb enough to think that you shouldn't be playing Seabreeze in Premium still, this card won me 2 games. If you don't understand why Seabreeze is good in Premium still, you just don't understand why Seabreeze is a good card, and you're most likely a bad player or just very underexperienced. Then I was playing 1 Obadiah. Now, I never actually got to use this card. There are situations and setups where this card is viable. They're very rare though. That's why I didn't actually end up using it that day. But there is a reason I put him in my deck. There are some scenarios where you're going to your stride. You need to set against things like Gizeh. Sometimes they'll be damage denying you. If you have no damage, you can go into him and at least set up for next turn. Go into this, dump 3 Skeleton Dragons and stuff, just to set up so you can have that chance if you get to your second stride, which you probably will, you'll have a fighting chance to actually try and kill them. So it's rare where he's helpful, but in the situations where it actually comes up, you're like, oh, I'm so glad I actually do have this. One of the GB8, which you use a lot, and it's stupid good. Nothing to say. It's a GB8, one of the best they ever made. So we had our 1 Megiddo. Obviously, this card wins you a lot of games. When your opponent's at 5 or 4, you go into Megiddo and you revive 3-4 Skeleton Dragons and a Nightstorm. Your opponent is probably dead. Then I played 2 Negro Songer. You don't use her a lot, but she's in here to help you beat Gizeh. You can one of the most important plays is you can go into her and bring out Franger and activate his skill. Then you can use Negro Songer here to attack with her, and then use her skill to revive a booster behind Franger. So that booster will be really big and help boost Franger to levels where nothing can possibly guard him, nothing. Like, even if your opponent can G-guard him, like, he'll just be too big, and his attack will get through. There was actually, like, one game also where the game went on, like, really long. Like, I GB8'd them, and they still weren't dead. I had 5 cards left in my deck, and I knew 3 of them were, one was a crit, one was a stand, one was a heal. So I was able to go into her, look at the user skill, look at 4 of them, pitch 1 of them, and that meant my deck was like 4 cards, with like 3 of them being triggers, and like I was able to revive a huge card. Like, the longer the game goes on, the better this card is. You don't use it a lot though, because it doesn't really help make like a full field, so she's only there for like certain scenarios. Then we have our main grade 4 of the deck, Night Rose. She just counterblasts 1, makes a field, and she has a critical. The critical is pretty relevant, especially in the No Life King match, which I'll talk about later. But yeah, she makes a field for like counterblast 1, which is like nothing. And then our first stride of the deck, Gauche. I think that's how you say this dude's name. This card is super good. The reason you don't ride your starter, or don't use your starter to move to the back, you just ride it, leave it in soul. Between that, all the cards you rode, and your Refugees, Banshees, and stuff, you first stride this guy, Soul Blast, like the starter, Soul Blast everything else, make a field, put your crit triggers back in soul, draw cards, end phase, refund all of your costs. He's just a really good first stride. He just makes the deck work. I've considered actually almost playing like a second set. I just don't have the room, but it's a really good first stride. And then for the G guards, to finish off the G zone, 2 of the G guard, I pretty much the only thing I ever use is Negronora here. So if you don't know, you can use Negronora to guard with 2 things from the drop zone. So when you use her, you can use her call out like the heal trigger you use to guard. So she'll be a 15 shield plus the 20 shield from the heal trigger, and then you can call out a grade 1. So you're going to be guarding for 15 plus 20, so that's 35 plus 10 more. So this one card guards for 45. That's a lot. But other than that, the best thing about her is that you guard with her, and you can call out cards from the drop zone to guard. So you can call out your PGs, either the draw or Freddy the Ghosty here. And because they just say when placed, they don't say when placed from hand, you can discard 1 PG. So in this deck, your G Guardians are perfect guards. This deck has so many options to perfect guard between protects, the actual perfect guards, and the G guards. It's silly. Like, it's so hard for your people to actually kill this deck, which is why it's able to beat No Life King. And then for our last 2 spots, just one of each of these guys. This guy, when you're guarding with a heal, you're going to be guarding for 20, and this guy just guards for 22. But the difference is, if you just need to guard for a certain amount, and it doesn't really matter how much it is, you're just 20. This guy can get you mill 2, which is almost like drawing a card in this deck. And then this thing guards, discards 1, draws. I used it a few times where I only needed to guard 15 to block the attack. But I was able to guard with this, discard like a skeleton dragon, get a draw for a card I could actually guard with during that turn, and that helped me a lot. So that is it for the deck profile. It's not drastically different than any other Granblue premium deck you've probably seen before, but I guess this is the part where we get into how to play this deck. So how do you use this deck to beat No Life King? Well, it's not easy. It's not a straightforward, I tell you what to do on paper, and you just follow that formula and it goes through every time. You need to actually, think, judge the situation every turn, and know what to do. You can't just be an idiot. If you're not very good, me giving you advice you're probably going to help. You're going to have to put real effort into it. You're probably going to have to practice quite a few times to get this down. But this deck can and almost always can beat No Life King. Like in the playtesting I did, like 9 times out of 10 I was beating No Life King. So I'm going to just give you the best advice I can and how I do it. So number 1, the first few turns of the game, do not damage their Vanguard. If you do, you're going to be killing yourself. On your, like, especially turn 1, turn 2, if there's a way you can avoid damaging, like there were times I rode like Dancing Cutlass and I was able to call like Rushie's Banshee to the back row, swing for 6, so I'm too small to hit, and even if I did get a trigger, I was able to give it to that Rushie's Banshee and avoid damaging them. And then turn 2, don't damage them. Don't do it. No Life King's ability to fight you is based on how much counterblast you give them. So you need to have time to prep for them to do a loop. So by not damaging them, you're giving yourself time. Turn 3, when you ride your grade 3, sometimes it is appropriate to attack their Vanguard. But if you do, try not to crit them. As I said, you need time to prepare yourself. Sometimes you do crit attack them, but usually you don't want to crit them. So as I said, you might want to have a rear guard to give a crit to if you do drive check 1. Obviously there's rare scenarios where your opponent's like got a shitty hand, like they know they don't have a grade 3 and stuff. In that case, it might be a good idea to just go wail on them, deal as much damage. But in general, for the first several turns of this game, you're not going to try and damage them. You're going to play, usually they will attack you. They might try not attacking you, like you aren't attacking them. In that case, like, that's not that bad either, because you're not taking damage. That's less damage you'll have to worry about when it comes to them doing the loop. And you're able to keep your cards in your hand too, so they don't, okay. But usually they will attack you. And that'll allow you to do your things like go into your gauche, build up your cards in your hand. So one of the important tricks to doing this matchup also, as I said, the important part is restricting how much counterblast you're giving them to hold them back. And this deck is really good at doing this type of strategy. You can go into your strides like these two, and using their skills, you'll be able to do things like call out your Skeleton Cannoneers and your Rushie's Banshees. So you'll be able to like stride, call out cards like these, and draw cards and kill your opponent's field with them. And then you can just go, well, I don't need to damage you, but I still built up my hand. End my turn, refund my cost with my Banshee, with my starter. So using these, you can do things like that. So revive, draw cards to build my hand like I did a drive check, but then don't actually attack their Vanguard. Obviously, if they have rear guards, attack that. No reason not to. But you can do this play to avoid damaging them. And then there are points where usually by the time you've done like a stride, you should be safe enough that you can put your opponent to like 2 or 3 damage and let them try to do the loop on you, which they almost always do. When they get to 3 damage, they're going to go for the loop typically. So when they do go for that loop and they come after you, you're going to have your protects from your rides, your heal triggers, and your PGs. You can do PGs, get them in the drop zone. I'll allow you to G guard, call that PG out, PG with it. If you're playing properly, you're going to be guarding early game also to keep your damage low. So when your opponent like loops you while you're at like 1 or 0 damage, you're like, I can just take some hits. I have all these PGs and G guards that PG, and I have these big triggers. I can get damage checks. You can very reasonably and easily, I'm just going to be honest, it's actually easy to survive a no life king loop when you only give them like 2-3 damage. And even if you give them more than that, they probably don't have enough cards in deck to go further on. So you can put them at 3 damage once you have like a good defense ready in your hand. That's when they'll typically go off, which will burn through their counterblast and burn through their deck. You survive pretty easily, and you won't even be in that bad of shape usually, to be honest. Then it will get onto your turn. That's when you're going to be doing your strides like Night Rose here. So you're going to be building your field, making a field, building up your hand through Banshees and Skeleton Cannoneers. If your opponent, and this does happen a lot, ends their turn leaving their assassins on the field, at that point you can be using your Cannoneers to snipe those assassins. And then you can also, that also will give you the opportunity to attack those assassins. Obviously, if your opponent doesn't have assassins and they're losing assassins, obviously really hinders their ability to play the deck. Also, once you get to this point in the game, her crit becomes very relevant. When your opponent's at 3 and you're attacking them with a crit, they want counterblast. But are they going to just no guard at 3 when a Vanguard with a crit is coming at them? Most likely not. So in that case, you're going to be able to do your drive checks and your opponent won't be getting counterblasts from you. And even if they are, and then when you get to like even later stages of the game where like they have very few cards in deck, there's a lot of times they'll want to take counterblast. They'll have the room to take the hit. In terms of like damage wise, but they won't want to take the hit, even though they want to take the hit for counterblast, because they'll be losing 2 cards out of their deck, and it's hard for. Usually, if your opponent does the loop one time, even they're already close to deck out. If they've done it twice, which by the way, you almost always can survive the loop twice, they're going to have to spend the rest of their game trying to not die. They're going to be worrying about, I can't deck out. They're not going to have the ability to keep trying to loop you. And in those scenarios, like, you're in good shape still. Her crit does matter. And usually once you're getting to this point, you don't have to worry so much anymore about giving them the counterblast. You can start attacking them, just going aggressive, like going into Night Rose, doing like Columbar attack into Columbar attack and the Night Mist and the Skeleton Dragons, just going after them like really hard. And not only are you like putting in like damage to, like, that can kill them, which they usually don't die from you attacking them. They usually don't. They can usually get through your attacks because they have so many cards in, so many PGs. They can get through it. But the added threat is they've got to block these attacks for the sake of like not dying and for the sake of not losing cards in their deck. Because it may sound trivial, like 1 or 2 cards, but as anyone who plays No Life King can tell you, like when you're down to like 4 or 5 cards in your deck, every card in deck matters, because you're going to have to wear out, if I take damage, it's 1 less card. I'm going to have to draw for turn, that's 1 less card. Then I'm probably going to have to do a soul charge, that's 1 less card. It really matters. And as I said, this is too nuanced of like the tactic, the way to play this deck for me to like really communicate everything about it, just like in like a simple formula like I am trying to communicate here. I'm just trying to give you guys a rough idea of how you can do it. You probably will need to sit down and practice it a lot to really like, it's one thing to hear the ideas and think of them on paper. Once you sit down and get used to it, it's another difference. And I can tell you, if you do make mistakes while trying to play against No Life King, even if you're following like this guide, if you make mistakes, like you give them 1 too many counterblast early on when you're not supposed to, you will lose because you made that single mistake. You have to be very, very careful how you give them counterblast. If you give them 1 too many counterblasts incorrectly, it will lose you the game. You have to play very smart to do this. It is very doable, but I can't put it. You do have to know what you're doing. Don't take this lightly. Practice. That is it. I don't think there's really anything else I didn't cover on it. This video is already 30 minutes. If you stuck through the whole thing, I appreciate it. I hope it helped you. Another thing to add, uh, while I did play this deck and I did get first place and I did beat the No Life Kings I played, like 2-0ing, that doesn't mean that this is like necessarily one of the best decks of Premium. I am not in any way saying that. This deck has a really hard time against Gize. In fact, my deck list name on my deck list sheet that I turned in was I can't beat Gize. Luckily, I didn't really have to play Gize, so that helped. Not gonna lie. Take that into account. You can probably beat No Life King with this deck, but you will more likely lose to Gize. So that is it. Thank you guys for watching.